Okay, so what we're going to do now is think about how you can plan for effective teaching in your teaching of mathematics. You need to draw on the work that we've discussed in the previous sessions because they will underpin how you're planning. So in terms of principles, the curriculum is consistent. What you're offering is consistent with mandated documents, and there are a number of those which you have access to and you need to become familiar with. And within those is what we call, there needs to be some intellectual integrity in terms of what you're offering. The curriculum that you offer should address the key areas of the mathematics curriculum and provide a wide range of experiences for the learners in your classroom. And those experiences need to be around issues of the materials that you use. And if you think about the different types of learners you have in your classroom, some learners are very oral, some learners are visual, some learners are kinesthetic, and providing a wide range of experiences for the student in terms of how you teach, what you teach, the materials you use, allows the diversity in your classroom to be catered for in terms of what you offer. You also need to make sure that the curriculum you offer is integrated across other areas of the curriculum, and in doing that, we hope that all of the students, in terms of what you're offering, allows them to engage productively with mathematics. With your national curriculum, and we have talked a little bit about this in the first week, the curriculum emphasises proficiency. So not only do the students have to learn the content of mathematics, but they also need to be good problem solvers, they need to have fluency in terms of what they're doing, and they need to be able to reason mathematically. What we're also looking for, and sadly one of the saddest, I think, indictments on mathematics is that what most students learn after 10 or 12 years of study of mathematics is that they can't do it. And they disengage with mathematics. And that's happening very, very early in primary schooling. So the curriculum that you're offering should be fostering a love for mathematics, but also so the students get a positive sense of themselves as learners. We don't want students to learn that they can't do mathematics. And I think up till now you're starting to realise that mathematics needs to be about social interactions, and you need to be able to foster an environment where students feel comfortable interacting with their peers and interacting with each other. We also need to know that your planning is catering for where students are, and there will be diversity in any classroom, so your task is always to find out where the students are and to offer learning experience for that, but then build that understanding through various scaffolding techniques so that the students can move forward. One of the things that you do need to think that you must refer to in your planning is that there is the National Curriculum for Mathematics, the Australian Curriculum for Mathematics, and in the years prior to schooling there's a number of other documents. Now these documents are all available on the website and you need to make reference to those. That is your responsibility to do that. So in terms of planning, what we need to do are three key things. Now, whilst I have listed them in this order, you could start anywhere. So you need to think about the learning outcomes, that is, what do you want the students to learn? Then the pedagogy, how you're going to achieve that, so how are you going to teach it? And then you've got to think about assessment, and how will you know if they've learnt it? There's a classic example of the person saying, I've taught my dog to whistle, somebody said, but he can't whistle, and the other person responds by saying, well, I didn't say he learnt it. So you can teach concepts, language, you can teach a whole lot of things, but one of the key things you need to also know is, have the children learnt it? So in terms of planning, what I've just proposed looks linear, but that doesn't address the iterative approach. So this needs to be much more cyclical in terms of what you're looking at. So it needs to look something much more like this. So you can start with, for example, assessment. So this is what the students now know. Then I'm going to plan of what the students will, how I'm going to teach that. Then I will teach it, And then I'll ask, have the students learnt it? Those who have, this is what I need to do for them in terms of planning, how I will teach it, I'll reassess. For those who don't, I'll probably have a different pathway. But this whole triadic approach is really important. So all of those things work together. It's not you plan, you teach, you assess, and that's the end of it. You have to be much more iterative in terms of your planning. So what you need to do is you need to find out what the students already know, where they need to be, planning on how you will scaffold that learning, assess whether they know that, and then you go back to where are they, have some of them learnt it, have some of them not learnt it, and where do I go from there. So this is a much more dynamic approach to planning. So what do I need to know in terms of what the students need to learn? So in terms of whether you want to call them objectives or learning statements, you need to say, are they measurable? So it's not often a case of, do they understand it fully? Because understanding is often partial. So you need to understand whether or how much that student has achieved what it is you're looking for. So it has to be measurable. It has to be observable. Can you see it? Often students will write their objective as, the students will understand the concept of 3, for example, but you don't know what goes inside somebody's head. So the only way you can interpret if the students understand the concept of 3 is you need to be able to observe it. And you need to be able to observe it on a number of occasions. Seeing it once does not necessarily mean the students have got it. It could have been by chance, it could have been copied, it could have been anything. So we're looking at observing things over time. So often in terms of writing your objectives, you will use action verbs. So they will be able to draw, represent, create, and so on. Things that you can say, yes, I have seen that, and I've seen it over time and in multiple representations. In terms of thinking about what you need to learn, you will take a lot of that from your curriculum documents, which are available to you, and you will use a lot of those statements in terms of your own planning. But in terms of your planning, you also need to cater for the diversity in any one class. Classes are not homogenous. So in terms of your identifying what the students are now, what you're going to teach, we need to think about how you are going to teach it. So the pedagogies that you adopt need to meet the needs of the learner. It needs to consolidate their current level of understanding so that it's very clear that they do know the concept that is the starting concept, but you need to move them forward. But in that process of moving them forward, you don't want to push them too far or too hard that they feel they can't do it and then disengage. What you want to do is to scaffold the learner so that they are able to move forward in a way that they feel confident and safe, but also in a process of that they're developing their resilience as well. But also you need to ensure that learning caters for the diversity amongst your students in terms of learning styles, their preference for learning, interests and backgrounds and so forth. In assessment, there are a number of things you need to consider. We need to think about informal and formal assessments. In the early childhood years, there's a lot more informal assessment. So they're things like observing the children while they're playing, keeping running records, keeping anecdotal records. But also there might be some formal assessment. And by formal assessment, that will be very much determined by the context you're in. So in the early years context, they might be just questions you pose to the child as they're doing tasks and the tasks that they actually do. We would not be advocating for any written tests at this level. There will be other ways of assessing. As we move more into abstract thinking, the later years of primary, early years of secondary, for example, then written assessments take a much stronger focus. 2 forms of assessment that you need to be doing. One is summative assessment, and that's the assessment of the learning. So if you've been teaching a concept and you want to know if this unit that you've been doing, if the students have learnt what you want them to know, whether they have learnt skip counting to 20, for example, you want the students to be able to show that they can skip count to 20, and that's the end of that. Increasingly, though, we're looking at this notion of assessment for learning. So the assessment that you use is then used in an iterative manner to inform the next round of your teaching. So it's not the end point, it becomes the starting point for the next cycle of learning. So assessment for learning is gaining a lot more credibility in the teaching of mathematics.